Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The GPS died exactly 3 miles before I should have reached my new address. And that was 6 months ago. I'm still here, still trying to leave. But let me tell you something that'll keep you up tonight. Some houses don't just shelter you. Some houses claim you. And once you're claimed, well, you'll understand soon enough. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I bought this house site unseen through an estate sale in rural Vermont. The price was so low it felt like stealing, which should have been my first warning. The realtor, Janet Morrison, seemed eager, too eager, to close the deal over the phone. "It's a charming 1890s farmhouse," she'd said, her voice crackling through bad cell reception. "Completely renovated. You won't find anything like it." She was right about that last part. The moving truck arrived first, somehow. When I pulled up 3 hours later, my boxes were already stacked on the wraparound porch like they'd been waiting for me. The driver, a stocky man named Mike, looked relieved to see me. "Strangest thing," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the October chill. GPS kept recalculating the route here. Took us down roads that shouldn't exist. He handed me the clipboard with shaking hands. "Sign here. And, ma'am, maybe get yourself a landline. Cell service out here is unpredictable." I signed, tipped him, and watched his truck disappear down the winding dirt road. The silence that followed felt thick, almost expectant. The house stood before me like something from a New England postcard. White clapboard siding, dark green shutters, and windows that reflected the autumn sky so perfectly they looked like mirrors. A chimney released a thin ribbon of smoke, though I hadn't started any fires yet. Inside, everything was exactly as promised. Hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. A stone fireplace with logs already arranged in the hearth. The kitchen had been updated with modern appliances, but they'd kept the original farmhouse sink and exposed beams. It felt like home immediately, which should have been my second warning. The first week passed like a dream. I worked remotely as a freelance graphic designer, so isolation didn't bother me. In fact, I welcomed it after years of cramped Boston apartments and noisy neighbors. Here, the only sounds were wind through the maples and the occasional creak of settling wood. I established routines quickly. Morning coffee on the back porch, overlooking fields that stretched to a dark line of pine trees. Afternoon walks down the dirt road, though I never seemed to walk very far before feeling drawn back to the house. Evening fires in the stone hearth, reading until my eyes grew heavy. But small things began to feel off. My car keys, which I always left on the kitchen counter, kept migrating to different locations. The hook by the front door, the coffee table, once, bizarrely, on top of the refrigerator. When I mentioned it during a video call with my sister Emma, she just laughed. "You're getting old, Sarah. 35 and already losing your keys." "I'm 32, I corrected, but she'd already moved on to talking about her kids. The internet worked perfectly inside the house but died completely at the property line. I discovered this while trying to work on the front porch one particularly nice morning. As soon as I stepped beyond the white picket gate, my laptop showed no available networks, not even cellular data. "Rural Vermont," I muttered, moving my workspace back inside. But it was the GPS issue that really started to worry me. Every delivery driver, every service person, every visitor experienced the same thing. Their navigation systems would malfunction within a 3-mile radius of the house. The UPS driver, a friendly woman named Carol, finally mentioned it during her third confused arrival. "It's the damnedest thing," she said, scanning the package for my online shopping addiction. "My GPS just gives up. Shows me taking roads that loop back on themselves. Sometimes I feel like I'm driving in circles for an hour before I suddenly just arrive here. I laughed it off, but that night I tried mapping my own address on my phone. The satellite view showed my property clearly: the white farmhouse, the red barn out back, the circular driveway. But when I tried to get directions from town, the app seemed confused. It would calculate a route, then recalculate, then offer increasingly bizarre alternatives that led through non-existent roads. Probably just outdated mapping data, I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself. 3 weeks in, I decided to drive to town for groceries. It was a Thursday morning, crisp and clear, with maple leaves carpeting the driveway in shades of gold and scarlet. I backed out confidently, humming along to the radio. 20 minutes later, I was pulling back into my driveway. I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to process what had happened. I'd driven straight down the dirt road, just like always, made the right turn onto Pine Ridge Road, just like I'd done with the real estate agent, followed the signs toward Millbrook Center. But somehow, I'd ended up home. I tried again immediately. This time I paid closer attention to landmarks. The red mailbox shaped like a barn. There. The stone wall with the missing section. There. The bridge over Willow Creek. There. All exactly where they should be. But somehow the road curved when it should have been straight. Turned left when I was certain it had turned right before . And 40 minutes later I was staring at my own front porch again. The third attempt was when things got truly strange. I decided to document everything using my phone to record the drive. I narrated each turn, each landmark, checking the timestamps obsessively. Okay, it's 2:47 p.m. I quote M, leaving the driveway, heading south on the dirt road towards Pine Ridge. The gravel crunched under my tires in a familiar rhythm. 2:52 p.m., passing the red barn mailbox. Everything normal so far. But when I played back the recording later, my voice cut out completely during certain sections. Not static or muffled, just absent, as if those moments had been carefully edited out by invisible hands. Even stranger, the timestamps jumped . According to my phone, I'd been driving for 23 minutes, but the recording showed over an hour of footage. An hour of me driving through landscapes that definitely weren't Vermont. Rolling hills covered in wildflowers that shouldn't bloom in November. Desert stretches with cacti and red rock formations. At one point, I swear I drove past a lake so blue it looked artificial, surrounded by palm trees swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel through my closed windows. But I remembered none of it. In my memory, I'd driven the same familiar route, past the same landmarks, making the same turns that somehow led me home. The recording ended with me pulling into my driveway at 4:31 p.m., looking confused but not alarmed. On camera, I looked directly at my phone and said, "Well, that was a nice drive to town. Got everything I needed." But my grocery bags were empty. My gas tank was still full, and I had no memory of speaking those words. That night, I called my friend Marcus in Boston. He was a software engineer, logical and practical. Exactly what I needed. "Sarah, how's the hermit life treating you?" His voice sounded far away, like he was calling from another planet. "Marcus, I need you to do me a favor. Can you look up my address online? Just tell me what you find." "Sure, hold on." I heard typing in the background. "Okay, what's the address again?" I gave him the full address, including the zip code I'd memorized from dozens of packages. More typing, then silence. "Marcus? That's weird. Are you sure you got the address right? GPS says there's nothing there, like nothing. The map shows forest, then more forest, then a state park. No houses, no roads, no anything. Try satellite view." "I am. It's just trees, Sarah, miles of trees. Are you sure you're not in some kind of off-grid situation? Maybe the house isn't officially registered?" But I knew what he'd see if he looked at the right place. The white farmhouse, clear as day, the red barn, the circular driveway. I'd seen it myself on my phone before the GPS started malfunctioning. Marcus, I'm going to send you a photo of the house. Tell me if you can see it. I snapped a picture of the front porch and sent it immediately. The photo sent successfully, but when I checked our conversation thread, it showed as a failed message. Did you get the photo? What photo? You didn't send anything. I tried again. Same result. The image would appear to send, then vanish from our conversation as if it had never existed. Never mind, I said finally. I'll figure it out. But after we hung up, doubt began creeping in like cold fog. If my house didn't show up on maps, if photos wouldn't send, if delivery drivers got lost trying to find me, then what exactly was I living in? That evening, I walked through every room with fresh eyes, looking for signs, for clues, for anything that might explain what was happening. The house felt solid enough, real enough. But when I really examined the details, inconsistencies emerged. The magazines on the coffee table were current issues of Better Homes and Gardens and National Geographic, but the copyright dates were from 1987. The milk in my refrigerator had an expiration date 3 months in the future, but tasted fresh. The grandfather clock in the hallway showed the correct time, but its pendulum never moved. And the mirrors. Every mirror in the house showed my reflection perfectly, except in my peripheral vision, where I sometimes caught glimpses of other figures, shadows of people who weren't there when I turned to look directly. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence. But each morning, I'd find yesterday's entries had changed. Not dramatically, just small alterations. Dates that shifted by a day or two. Details that became hazier, more uncertain, as if the house was gently editing my memories, making the impossible seem normal. My hands were shaking as I called Janet Morrison. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, this is Janet Morrison with Green Mountain Realty. I'm currently out of the office indefinitely. If this is regarding the Millbrook property, please contact our sister office in Burlington. If this is an emergency..." I hung up and tried the Burlington number. It rang once, then disconnected. Every time I called back, the same thing happened. But something nagged at me about Janet's voice. It sounded off, too cheerful, too practiced, like a recording from decades ago. I called back and listened more carefully to the voicemail message. Behind Janet's voice, I could hear faint background sounds. A television playing what sounded like a game show from the 1980s. A dog barking, children laughing. Normal household sounds. Except they repeated exactly every 37 seconds. The same laugh track, the same bark, the same muffled television dialogue. It was a loop. A carefully constructed audio loop designed to sound like real life. I started researching Janet Morrison online, or trying to. Every search returned results, but they were strange. Professional headshots that looked like they were taken with 1990s photography equipment, client testimonials that used outdated slang and references, a company website that looked modern but felt somehow hollow, like a movie set facade. The deeper I dug, the more artificial everything seemed. Janet Morrison existed, but only in the context of my house purchase. No social media presence. No professional history beyond 5 years ago. No personal life that extended beyond her role as my realtor. It was as if she had been created specifically to sell me this house, and then ceased to exist once the transaction was complete. But if Janet wasn't real, then who had I actually bought the house from? And more importantly, who actually owned it? That afternoon, I decided to explore the property more thoroughly. I'd been so focused on trying to leave that I'd never fully investigated what I was trying to leave behind. The barn behind the house was larger than it had appeared from a distance. Inside, I found tools that looked well-maintained but ancient. A pitchfork with a wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use. Leather horse tack hanging from hooks, though I'd never seen any horses on the property. and in the loft, trunks full of clothing from different eras. Victorian dresses with mother-of-pearl buttons. Men's suits from the 1940s, still creased as if they'd just come from the tailor. A collection of children's shoes, small and heartbreakingly empty, arranged in neat rows like a museum display. Each trunk had a nameplate. Margaret Thornfield, 1,923 to 1,954 inches. Thomas Webb, 1,951 to 1,987 inches. The Morrison family, 1,962 to 1,963 inches. Morrison, like Janet Morrison, my realtor, I opened the Morrison trunk with trembling hands. Inside were family photos, and there was Janet, looking exactly as she had during our phone calls, standing next to a man and two young children in front of my house. But the photo was clearly from the 1960s, judging by the clothing and the faded color quality. At the bottom of the trunk I found a deed, not to purchase the house, but to donate it. The Morrison family had left their property to something called the Millbrook Preservation Trust in 1963, with a stipulation that it continue to provide sanctuary for those in need of permanent shelter. My blood went cold. Permanent shelter. But it was the final document that made me drop the trunk's contents entirely. A death certificate for the entire Morrison family, dated 3 days after they'd signed the deed. Carbon monoxide poisoning, the report said. Tragic accident. The whole family, including young Janet Morrison, age 8. But Janet Morrison had sold me this house. I'd spoken to her, heard her voice, signed documents she'd prepared. Unless the 8-year-old Janet Morrison from 1963 had somehow become my adult realtor in 2024, I backed out of the barn, my heart hammering against my ribs. The afternoon sun seemed dimmer now, the shadows longer and more threatening. As I hurried back toward the house, I noticed something I'd missed before. The windows on the second floor, some of them showed warm yellow light from within, as if people were moving around up there, but I lived alone. I'd been in every room of the house, and half of the second floor was supposedly unused storage space. Yet there were the lights, and occasionally shadows passing by the windows. The shadows of people who couldn't possibly be there. That evening, I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, trying to process what I'd discovered. The house felt different now. Not malevolent, exactly, but watchful. Like it knew I'd been snooping and was deciding how to respond. Around midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the ceiling directly above me. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the stairs, but with each step I climbed, the footsteps grew fainter. By the time I reached the second floor, the hallway was empty and silent. But the lights were on in rooms I knew I'd never entered, and through the doorways I caught glimpses of furnished spaces that didn't match my mental map of the house. A nursery with a rocking chair moving gently back and forth. A study filled with books and papers, as if someone had just stepped away from their desk. A bedroom with clothes laid out on the bed, as if someone was preparing to get dressed for an important occasion. Rooms that shouldn't exist, filled with the belongings of people who shouldn't be there. I retreated to my own bedroom and locked the door, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. If the house itself was keeping me here, if the very walls were part of some elaborate trap, then locks were probably meaningless. But as I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of a house full of invisible residents, I realized something that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. I wasn't afraid anymore. Confused, yes. Overwhelmed, absolutely. But not afraid. Because despite everything I'd discovered, despite the impossibility of my situation, I still felt safe. Cared for. Like I was exactly where I belonged, even if I didn't understand why or how. And that, more than anything else, told me just how thoroughly the house had already claimed me. That afternoon I walked to the property line. The white picket fence marked the boundary clearly, and beyond it, Pine Ridge Road stretched in both directions. I could see my tire tracks from the morning's failed expeditions, physical proof that I'd driven out and somehow returned. I stepped beyond the gate and immediately felt wrong. Not sick exactly, more like being underwater. Sounds became muffled. Colors seemed less vibrant. The October air that had felt crisp and energizing now felt thin and insufficient. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Come back inside." I looked around. No other houses were visible. No cars on the road. The message could have come from anywhere or nowhere. Another buzz. "It's getting cold out there." I backed toward the gate, and with each step, the world became clearer. Sounds sharpened. Colors returned to their autumn brilliance. By the time I crossed the threshold back onto my property, I felt normal again. But normal was starting to feel relative. October became November, and I stopped trying to leave. Not because I'd given up, but because the attempts were becoming increasingly disturbing. The roads didn't just loop back anymore. They changed completely. I'd drive down Pine Ridge Road and find myself on a different road entirely, one that didn't exist on any map but somehow led me home anyway. Once, I tried walking out instead of driving. I made it about half a mile before the road simply ended. Not at an intersection or a dead-end sign. It just stopped being a road and started being a field. When I turned around, there was my house, visible in the distance, though by my calculations I should have been walking away from it. The most unsettling part, I was starting to not mind. The house took care of me in ways that felt almost nurturing. The refrigerator never seemed to run out of food, though I couldn't remember having groceries delivered. The internet worked flawlessly for my design projects, even though it died at the property line. Bills arrived in my mailbox and were automatically paid from my bank account, though I'd never set up auto pay. But it was more than just convenience. The house seemed to anticipate my needs in ways that felt almost telepathic. When I woke up with a headache, I'd find aspirin and a glass of water on my nightstand. When I felt restless, I'd discover a new book on my coffee table. Always something I'd been meaning to read, but had never gotten around to purchasing. The house was learning me, studying my habits, my preferences, my emotional states, and responding accordingly. It was like being in a perfectly crafted bubble of comfort and convenience. But bubbles, I was beginning to realize, were meant to keep things in as much as to keep things out. I started testing the boundaries more deliberately, not trying to escape, but trying to understand the rules of my confinement. The internet worked perfectly for work, but social media sites loaded strangely. My Facebook feed showed posts from friends and family, but they all felt generic. Happy birthday wishes that could apply to anyone. Vacation photos from places that looked vaguely familiar but somehow artificial. It was as if the house was generating a social media experience designed to keep me content without actually connecting me to the outside world. When I tried to post something myself, a photo of the beautiful autumn view from my window, it would appear to upload successfully, but when I checked later, the post would be gone. Not deleted, just never posted at all. My design clients continued sending projects and praising my work, but when I tried to research these companies online, they had the same hollow quality as Janet Morrison's real estate business. Professional websites that looked real but felt empty. Client testimonials that used oddly formal language. No social media presence, no news articles, no evidence of real-world existence beyond our professional relationship. It was as if the house was creating an entire artificial ecosystem to keep me busy and financially stable, while slowly severing my connections to reality. And the most disturbing part? It was working. I found myself caring less about the outside world with each passing day. Why worry about politics or social issues when my little bubble was so peaceful? Why maintain friendships that required effort when the house provided everything I needed? I was becoming a ghost long before I died, fading from the world so gradually that I barely noticed it happening. My sister called less frequently. When she did, our conversations felt strained and distant, like we were speaking across a vast gap of static. "You sound different," she said during our last call. "Are you happy out there, really happy?" I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? I felt content, safe, provided for, but happy. The word seemed to belong to a different language, one I was slowly forgetting how to speak. "I think so," I said finally. "Well, good, I guess. It's just, Sarah, are you sure you're okay? I tried to look up your address to send you a birthday card and GPS says it doesn't exist. And when I called the phone company to verify your landline, they said there's no service to that area. No service at all. That's just a mapping error. Rural Vermont has lots of..." The line went dead. When I tried calling back, I got a recording. "The number you have dialed is not currently in service." But my sister's number hadn't changed in 5 years. I tried calling other family members, old friends, former colleagues. Same result every time. Either the numbers were suddenly out of service, or the calls would connect, but the person on the other end would sound confused, as if they barely remembered who I was. "Sarah? Sarah who? Oh, Sarah. Right. I'm sorry, you sound so different. How long has it been? Years, right? But I'd spoken to my college roommate just 2 months ago. The house wasn't just keeping me in. It was erasing me from the outside world. Relationship by relationship, connection by connection. Soon, I would exist only here, in this space between spaces with no ties to the world I was leaving behind. And the worst part, I was starting to be okay with that. Because what was out there, really? Stress and deadlines and bills and disappointments. Relationships that required constant maintenance. A world that seemed to grow more chaotic and frightening every day. Here, I had peace, security, purpose, even in my design work for clients who appreciated my efforts. Why should I mourn the loss of a world that had never made me as happy as this house did? The rationalization came so easily that I barely recognized it as the house's influence. It felt like my own thoughts, my own logical conclusions, which was probably exactly how the house wanted it to feel. My sister called less frequently. When she did, our conversations felt strained and distant, like we were speaking across a vast gap of static. "You sound different," she said during our last call. "Are you happy out there, really happy?" I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? I felt content, safe, provided for, but happy? "I think so," I said finally. "Well, good, I guess. It's just, Sarah, are you sure you're okay? I tried to look up your address to send you a birthday card and GPS says it doesn't exist. That's just a mapping error. Rural Vermont has lots of..." The line went dead. When I tried calling back, I got a recording. "The number you have dialed is not currently in service." But my sister's number hadn't changed in 5 years. That night, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the fields. Moonlight turned everything silver and strange. The tree line seemed closer than usual, and I could swear I saw lights moving between the branches. Not flashlights or headlights. Something softer, more organic. As I watched, a figure emerged from the trees. Tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long coat. It walked across the field with purposeful strides, heading directly toward the house. I should have been terrified. Should have called the police or grabbed a weapon or at least locked the doors. Instead, I felt expected. The figure reached the back porch and stopped. It turned to look up at my window, and I saw its face clearly in the moonlight. An older man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He raised one hand in a small wave, then disappeared around the side of the house. I heard the front door open and close, footsteps in the hallway below, and still, I felt no fear, only a strange sense of completion, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I found him in the kitchen the next morning, making coffee. He was exactly as he'd appeared in the moonlight. Tall, thin, wearing a long brown coat that had seen better decades. His hair was silver white and neatly combed, and his face held the kind of weathered kindness you'd expect from a favorite uncle. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, handing me a steaming mug. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. The house told me you were ready." I accepted the coffee automatically. It was perfect, exactly the right temperature, with just the hint of cream I preferred. "Ready for what?" I heard myself ask. "To understand." He gestured to the kitchen table where a second mug waited. "My name is Henry Blackwood. I lived here from 1952 to 1987. Lived here, past tense." His smile was gentle but sad. "I never really left, Sarah. None of us do. The house, it gets lonely. You see, every few decades it finds someone who needs shelter, someone who's been looking for home without knowing it. It offers sanctuary, and in return, you stay." I should have run, should have screamed, should have demanded explanations or called for help. Instead, I sat down across from him and sipped my coffee. It tasted like safety. "How many others?" I asked. "Oh, quite a few over the years. We tend to keep to ourselves, mostly, respect each other's space and routines, but we're here if you need us. Margaret grows the most beautiful vegetables in the back garden. You've probably been eating them without realizing. And Thomas maintains the furnace and the plumbing. Keeps everything running smoothly." Are you dead?" Henry chuckled. "That's a more complicated question than you might think. We're not alive in the traditional sense, no, but we're not gone either. We're preserved, protected. The house takes care of its own." I thought about the past month. The increasing difficulty leaving. The sense of being watched over and provided for. The growing contentment despite the isolation. "What if I want to leave?" I asked. "Do you?" I opened my mouth to say yes, of course I did. Everyone wants the freedom to come and go as they please. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, I didn't. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace. No deadline stress, no social anxiety, no pressure to be anywhere or anyone except exactly who I was. The house chose well, Henry said softly. It always does. You were looking for home, Sarah. Really, truly looking. Most people think they want freedom, but what they actually want is belonging, security, a place where they're valued and protected. And the price? Is it really a price if you're getting everything you've ever wanted? I looked around the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. The coffee was perfect. The silence was comfortable. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to check my phone, or refresh my email, or worry about tomorrow's deadlines. How long do I have to decide? Henry's expression grew knowing. You already have, dear, the moment you stopped trying to leave. You chose to stay. The house just wanted you to understand what that meant. He was right. I had chosen. Maybe I'd chosen the moment I signed those papers sight unseen. Maybe I'd chosen when I felt immediately comfortable in a place I'd never seen before. Or maybe I'd chosen last night, when I felt no fear at seeing a stranger emerge from the woods. Will I become like you? Eventually. It's a gradual process. You'll find yourself needing sleep less. Food less, the outside world will fade until it feels like a distant dream. But you'll have peace, Sarah, real peace. No more searching, no more wanting. Just home. I nodded slowly. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Henry finished his coffee and stood. I'll let you process this at your own pace. We all did the same, but know that you're not alone anymore. You never will be again. He headed toward the back door, then paused. "Oh, and Sarah? Welcome home." That was 6 months ago, or maybe 6 years. Time moves differently here now, flowing like honey through seasons that blur into one eternal autumn. I still work on my designs, though I'm not sure where I send them or who pays for them. The house takes care of those details. I still read by the fireplace and watch the sunrise from the back porch. I still feel contentment in ways I never did in my old life. Sometimes I see the others, Margaret tending her impossible garden, Thomas fixing something that's never actually broken, a woman named Claire who reads in the front parlor, a man called James who plays piano in the evening hours, filling the house with melodies that seem to come from the walls themselves. We nod to each other, smile, respect the beautiful solitude we've all found. And sometimes, late at night, I stand at my bedroom window and watch the tree line, waiting for the next figure to emerge from the shadows. The next person who's been searching for home without knowing it. The next person the house will claim, because that's what we do here. We wait, we welcome. We help the house find those who need finding, and we never, ever leave. But here's what I want you to think about tonight as you lie in your bed in your temporary shelters. How hard are you searching for home? How tired are you of running from place to place, never quite finding where you belong? Because if you're searching hard enough, if you're lonely enough, if you need shelter badly enough, the house might just find you too. Sweet dreams. What do you think happened to Sarah? Was she trapped or saved? Have you ever felt a house calling to you? Share your thoughts below, and maybe check your GPS next time you're driving through rural Vermont. Don't forget to subscribe for more cozy horror stories that will haunt your dreams. Story number 2. The rusted Ferris wheel still turns on windless nights. I know because I've seen it. And if you're listening to this right now, cozy in your bed, thinking this is just another story, well, maybe it is. Or maybe you'll remember this warning when you find yourself standing at the gates of Wonderland Park in Millbrook, Iowa, wondering why the ticket booth light is still on after 37 years of abandonment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you what happened that October night, before I explain why I still wake up at 3:47 a.m. every single night, hearing that carousel music, I need you to promise me something. If you ever see a carnival ticket stuck under your windshield wiper, one that says, "Admit one, valid forever," just throw it away. Don't look at the back. Don't wonder how it got there. Just throw it away. Still here? Good. That means you're brave enough, or foolish enough, to hear what really happened. The story begins now. My name is Jake Morrison, and 3 weeks ago, I was just another urban explorer with a YouTube channel nobody watched. You know the type. Abandoned malls, old hospitals, forgotten theme parks. I had maybe 300 subscribers, most of them probably bots. But everything changed when I got that email from Retro Roadside 73. Check out Wonderland Park, Millbrook, Iowa. Closed 1987. Nobody goes there anymore. Nobody talks about why. Simple message. No signature. The sender's email bounced when I tried to reply, but the attached GPS coordinates, those worked just fine. I should have known something was wrong when my phone's navigation kept trying to reroute me. 3 times it told me the destination didn't exist. 3 times I manually entered those coordinates. The 4th time, it just gave up and guided me down County Road 49, past endless cornfields that seemed to whisper in the October darkness. The thing about abandoned places is they usually have a story. Wonderland Park's story was complicated. Built in 1952 by Harold Winthrop, a man who made his fortune in corn syrup and spent it all trying to create Iowa's answer to Disneyland. For 35 years, families drove from Des Moines, Omaha, even Chicago to ride the Tornado roller coaster and eat cotton candy while watching the sun set over the prairie. Then came October 15th, 1987. The park closed mid-season. No explanation. No goodbye. Just closed. One day, kids were laughing on the carousel. The next day, chains were on the gates. The employees got their final paychecks in the mail. Harold Winthrop disappeared. His mansion in town sat empty until it burned down in 1993, though nobody ever proved it was arson. I pulled into what used to be the parking lot at 11:23 p.m. My headlights swept across acres of cracked asphalt, weeds growing through the spaces where families once parked their station wagons. In the distance, the Ferris wheel stood against the sky like the skeleton of some prehistoric creature, silent, still, watching. The main gate was exactly where Google Earth said it would be, though the satellite images were from 2019 and oddly blurry. The chains that should have been there weren't. The gates stood slightly open, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Above them, the Wonderland Park sign hung at an angle, most of its paint peeled away, but you could still make out the smiling cartoon rabbit mascot. Wendell the Wonder Rabbit, according to my research. In the darkness, his grin looked different. I grabbed my backpack, flashlight, extra batteries, GoPro, emergency phone charger, granola bars, water. The usual kit. The temperature had dropped since I'd left Cedar Rapids and my breath came out in small clouds. October in Iowa isn't usually this cold, but then again, nothing about this felt usual. The gates creaked when I pushed through them. Not the dramatic horror movie creak you're imagining, just a small, tired sound, like the park was sighing. The midway stretched out before me, game booths on either side. Ring toss, milk bottle throw, duck pond. Their painted signs were faded, but readable. Everyone's a winner. Test your skill. Prize every time. The stuffed animals were gone, of course. Probably looted decades ago. But the shelves remained, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray snow. I was filming everything, narrating in whispers even though there was nobody around for miles. That's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading deeper into the park. My first thought was another urban explorer. It happens. Places like this attract people like me. People looking for something. Adventure, maybe. Content, definitely. Or just proof that forgotten things can still matter. But these footprints, they weren't from hiking boots or sneakers. They were dress shoes. Who explores an abandoned theme park in dress shoes? I followed them because I'm an idiot, honestly. But also because they led exactly where I wanted to go anyway. Toward the Tornado, the park's famous wooden roller coaster. Even in its decay, it was magnificent. The wooden frame rose into the darkness like a mountain range, all peaks and valleys and impossible turns. The kind of coaster they don't build anymore because lawyers exist. The footprints stopped at the ride's entrance. The queue area was a maze of rusted metal railings designed to hold hundreds of eager riders. Now it held only shadows. But the operator's booth had light coming from inside. Not electric light, candle light. Flickering, warm, impossible. I should have left then. Every instinct I'd developed in 3 years of exploring abandoned places screamed at me to turn around, get in my car, and drive until I hit Minnesota. But the camera was rolling, and somewhere in my stupid brain, I thought about those 300 subscribers. This was it. This was the video that would change everything. I approached the booth slowly, flashlight in one hand, phone ready to dial 911 in the other, though I had no signal. Hadn't had one since I passed the last gas station 20 miles back. Inside the booth, sitting on a wooden stool that should have rotted away years ago, was an old man in a Carnival Barker's uniform. Red and white striped vest, black bow tie, straw boater hat. His face was normal. That's what made it terrifying. He looked like somebody's grandfather, weathered and kind, with deep laugh lines and gentle eyes. He was reading a newspaper by candlelight. The newspaper was dated October 15th, 1987. "Evening," he said without looking up. "Bit late for a ride, isn't it?" My mouth went dry. The park's been closed for 37 years. He folded his newspaper carefully, precisely, like it was made of gold leaf. When he finally looked at me, his smile was sad. "Has it really been that long? Time moves differently here. I'm Arthur, by the way, Arthur Jennings. I run the Tornado." He gestured at the massive coaster behind him. "Ran, run. Tenses get complicated when you've been doing the same job since 1959. "You can't have been," I started, but math has never been my strong point, especially when my heart was trying to escape through my throat. "I was 22 when Mr. Winthrop hired me," Arthur said. "Fresh out of the army, Korea, needed a job, any job. He needed someone reliable to run his prize attraction. 65 years I've been sitting in this booth, rain or shine, even after—" He trailed off, looking at something beyond me, beyond the park, beyond everything. "After what?" I asked. The camera was still rolling. My hands were shaking so badly the footage would be unusable, but I couldn't stop recording. "After the accident," he said simply. "October 15th, 1987. The last day. The day that never ended." Arthur stood up slowly, joints creaking like old floorboards. He wasn't transparent, wasn't floating, wasn't doing any of the things ghosts are supposed to do. He was just there, solid, real, impossible. "Would you like to see the park?" he asked. "I mean really see it, not this—" He gestured at the decay around us. "This isn't Wonderland. This is just what's left when the wonder goes away." "I don't understand." "Few do." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a ticket. Not a modern ticket, one of those old-fashioned ones, like from a roll, perforated edges and all. "Mr. Winthrop always said the park existed for those who needed it most. Tonight, Jake. Yes, I know your name. Tonight, you need it." "How do you know my name?" "The park knows everyone who enters. Always has. It remembers every child who ever rode the carousel, every couple who shared their first kiss at the top of the Ferris wheel, every father who won a stuffed bear for his daughter at the ring toss. And it knows you've been searching for something, not just content for your channel, something else, something you lost." My sister, Emma. She'd loved old amusement parks, dragged me to every county fair and traveling carnival within 100 miles of home. She'd died 2 years ago. Car accident. 23 years old. I started exploring abandoned places because they reminded me of her somehow. Places where joy used to live. I hadn't told anyone that. Not my therapist, not my parents, no one. "Take the ticket," Arthur said gently. "Just for tonight. One ride. One walk through Wonderland as it really is. As it always is, for those who need it." I took the ticket. The moment my fingers touched it, the world shifted. The candle in the booth became an electric bulb. The rusted railings turned shiny and new, the silence filled with music. Not creepy carousel music like you're imagining, but the real thing. Cheerful. Bright. The sound of a place where people come to forget their troubles, and there were people. Hundreds of them. Families walking the midway, teenagers holding hands, children running from ride to ride. They were dressed in clothes from every era. 1950s poodle skirts, 1970s bell-bottoms, 1980s members-only jackets. All mixed together like time was just a suggestion. "Don't be afraid," Arthur said, stepping out of his booth. "They're just echoes, memories, The park remembers everyone who was ever happy here. The tornado behind him was no longer a wooden skeleton, but a living thing. Cars racing up and down its hills while riders screamed in delight. The carnival games were staffed by young men in striped vests, calling out to potential customers. The air smelled like popcorn and cotton candy, and that peculiar mixture of motor oil and sugar that only exists in amusement parks. "This is impossible," I whispered. "The impossible happens every day," Arthur replied. "We just usually don't notice. Come on, let me show you around. You've got until dawn." We walked down the midway, and I noticed something strange about the echoes. Some of them noticed me. A little girl in a 1960s dress waved. A teenage boy in a Letterman jacket nodded. They could see me, but I understood instinctively that I couldn't interact with them. They were recordings, but recordings that knew they were being watched. Arthur led me past the funhouse, its mirrors reflecting not me, but 1,000 different versions of happiness. Past the tilt-a-whirl, where a young couple was having their first date, over and over, eternal and perfect. Past game booths where every throw was a winner, and every prize was exactly what the player hoped for. "Mr. Winthrop understood something," Arthur said as we walked. "He understood that some places become more than places. They become ideas, concepts. This park, it's every happy memory of every park that ever was. It exists because people need it to exist. But it closed. The real park closed. The physical park, yes, but this..." He gestured at the impossible carnival around us. "This never closed. It just became harder to find. You need the right ticket, the right reason, the right amount of sadness mixed with hope." We stopped at the carousel. It was magnificent. Hand-carved horses in impossible colors, a calliope playing a waltz I almost recognized. And there, riding a violet horse with a golden saddle, was Emma. Not an echo, not a memory. Emma, my sister. 23 years old, wearing the sundress she'd worn to the last county fair we'd attended together, a week before the accident. "Jake," she said, and her voice was exactly as I remembered. "Is that really you?" My knees went weak. Arthur caught my arm, kept me standing. "It's not really her," he whispered. "I'm sorry. It's what the park thinks you need to see, what it pulled from your memories." But God, she looked real, sounded real. The carousel slowed, stopped. She climbed down from her horse and walked toward me, and every detail was perfect. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the little scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike at age 7, the way she smiled with just the left side of her mouth when she was trying not to cry. "I've been waiting for you," she said. "The park said you'd come eventually, said you were carrying too much guilt." "It wasn't my fault," I said. And I was crying now, not caring that Arthur was watching, not caring about anything except this impossible moment. "I know," she said. "I never blamed you. Not for being too busy to drive me that night. Not for anything. But you've been exploring all these dead places, looking for me in the ruins. I'm not in the ruins, Jake. I'm in the joy. I'm in every happy memory we ever made. Every stupid joke, every shared pizza, every terrible movie we watched together. That's where I live now." She hugged me, and she felt real, solid, warm. She smelled like vanilla perfume and summer air. For 30 seconds, my sister was alive again. Then she stepped back, already fading at the edges like an old photograph. "The park can't hold me long," she said. "It's against the rules. But I needed you to know. You have to stop looking for me in abandoned places. Look for me in the living ones. The places where people are still laughing, still loving, still making the kind of memories we used to make." She was almost transparent now, the carousel horses visible through her sundress. "Emma, wait. Be happy, Jake. For both of us." And she was gone. The carousel was empty. The music had stopped. Arthur let me cry for a while. Didn't say anything stupid like, "It'll be okay," or "She's in a better place." Just stood there, a patient presence in an impossible carnival, while I fell apart and put myself back together. When I finally looked up, the park had changed again. Not back to ruins, but older somehow. Fewer people, the lights dimmer, the music slower, sadder. "We're approaching the end," Arthur said. "October 15th, 1987, the last day. The park shows it to everyone who visits, eventually. It wants people to know, to understand." "What happened?" "Come," he said. "I'll show you." He led me to the Ferris wheel. It was still turning, but only one car was occupied. A man sat alone at the very top, the car swaying gently. Even from the ground, I could see he was crying. "Harold Winthrop," Arthur said. "The owner, the dreamer, the man who built all this. Why is he crying?" His daughter, Sarah, she was 17, loved this park more than anything. Used to say she'd run it someday, make it even better than Walt's place in California. She had such plans, new rides, new shows, new ways to make people happy. The Ferris wheel turned, bringing Harold's car lower. He looked older than in the photographs I'd seen. Broken. "She died that morning," Arthur continued. "October 15th, cancer. Had been fighting it for 2 years. Harold spent everything he had on treatments, flew in specialists from around the world. Nothing worked. She died at 6:47 a.m., and by noon, Harold was here, sitting in that car, going around and around. That's why he closed the park? He didn't close it. He ended it. There's a difference. When the last family left that night, Harold chained the gates and walked back in. Sat in that Ferris wheel car until his heart gave out 3 days later. The police found him frozen to the seat. It was an early winter that year. But here's the thing nobody knows. He wasn't alone when he died." Arthur pointed to the other rides. I could see them now. Employees. Not many, maybe a dozen. All in their uniforms, all standing at their posts. "We stayed," Arthur said simply. "Couldn't leave him to die alone. Couldn't leave the park to die alone. So we stayed. Through the cold, through the hunger, through the end." "You all died?" "We transformed. Became part of the park. Guardians, keepers, whatever you want to call us. The park needed us, and we needed the park. It's been 37 years, and we're still here. Still running the rides for those who find their way in. Those who need what the park offers. Which is closure, peace, a chance to say goodbye properly. The world is full of people who never got to say goodbye, Jake. The park, it gives them that chance." The Ferris wheel stopped. Harold's car was at the bottom now. He stepped out, and I could see him clearly. A broken man in an expensive suit, holding a pink stuffed rabbit. Wendell, the Wonder Rabbit, his daughter's favorite. "Every night he rides," Arthur said. "Every night he comes down and walks to the carousel, where Sarah's favorite horse waits. And every night, for just a moment, she's there. 17 and healthy and laughing. They ride together once, and then she fades and he returns to the Ferris wheel. It's his heaven and his hell. That's horrible. That's love. The kind that doesn't know when to let go." Harold walked past us, unseeing, lost in his grief. The stuffed rabbit dragged on the ground behind him. "Is that my future?" I asked. "If I stay, riding the same ride forever, looking for Emma?" "No," Arthur said firmly. "That's why I gave you the ticket. One night, one goodbye, one chance to let go. The park doesn't want to trap anyone. Well, anyone except us, and we chose this. It wants to heal, but some wounds people won't let heal. The park was fading now, the lights going out one by one, the music slowing like a record player losing power, the echoes of happy families dissolved into mist. "It's almost dawn," Arthur said. "Time for you to go. What about you?" "I'll be here. We all will. Running the rides nobody rides, maintaining the park that doesn't exist, waiting for the next person who needs us." He smiled, and for the first time, I noticed how tired he looked. "It's not a bad existence. We had good lives here, happy lives. Now we have purpose. But you're trapped. Everyone's trapped by something, Jake. Jobs, relationships, regrets, fears. At least our trap has cotton candy and roller coasters." The park was almost gone now. I could see through the rides to the rusted metal beneath, through the lights to the darkness beyond, through Arthur to the empty booth behind him. "Before you go," he said, and his voice was fading too, "I need you to do something." "What?" "Tell people, not about us. Nobody would believe that. But tell them about places like this, places where happiness lived. Tell them that abandoned doesn't mean forgotten, that closed doesn't mean ended, that some things—" He was barely visible now, just a suggestion of red and white stripes. "That some things are too important to ever really die. I will. And Jake, your sister was right. Stop looking for the dead in dead places. But also, don't forget to remember the happiness, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. That's how we keep people alive, by remembering their joy." He pressed something into my hand. Another ticket, this one newer, white with black text. "Admit one, valid forever. In case you ever really need us again," he whispered. "But I don't think you will." And then I was standing alone in the rusted remains of Wonderland Park. The sun was rising over the cornfields, painting everything gold. The Ferris wheel stood still and silent. The tornado was just rotting wood and tetanus warnings. The carousel horses were long gone, sold at auction, or stolen, or simply rotted away. But in my hand, I held 2 tickets. One old and yellowed, dated October 15th, 1987. One new and crisp, dated today. Both absolutely real. I sat in my car for an hour, just staring at those tickets. The GoPro had recorded everything, but when I reviewed the footage, it showed exactly what you'd expect. Me walking through an abandoned park, talking to nobody, crying at an empty carousel. 4 hours of footage compressed into what looked like a psychotic break. But the tickets were real, and more importantly, what happened was real to me. I drove back to Cedar Rapids in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on asphalt and wind through the windows. Every few miles, I'd glance at the tickets on my passenger seat, making sure they hadn't vanished. When I got home, I had a choice to make. Post the footage as is. Crazy man talks to ghosts in abandoned park. Or tell the truth. Make something up. Or say nothing at all. I chose the truth, not the whole truth. Some things are too personal to share. But enough. I edited the footage, added narration, explained what I experienced even though the camera didn't capture it. I talked about Arthur and Harold, and the park that exists between reality and memory. I talked about Emma and guilt, and the weight of carrying ghosts. I titled the video, "I Met the Ticket Taker at the Abandoned Fairground." I posted it 3 weeks ago. It has 2.7 million views. The comments are what you'd expect. Some people think I'm lying, some think I'm crazy, some share their own stories of impossible encounters in abandoned places. But a few message me privately. They always start the same way. I found a ticket under my windshield wiper. I tell them all the same thing. Go, take the ticket and go. Find whatever peace the park offers. say whatever goodbye you need to say, but remember to leave before dawn. Remember that the living belong with the living. Last week, I got another email from Retro Roadside 73, just coordinates this time. A defunct zoo in Michigan, a closed hospital in Kentucky, an abandoned school in Texas. Places where something waits. Someone waits. Stories that need to be told. I haven't decided if I'll go. Part of me knows I should stop. Should take Emma's advice and Arthur's wisdom and look for joy in living places. But another part understands that abandoned places need witnesses. Need someone to remember they existed. Need someone to tell their stories before they're torn down and forgotten completely. The tickets are in my wallet now. Both of them. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, run my fingers along their perforated edges, smell the faint scent of popcorn and rust that still clings to them. They're my proof that impossible things happen, that love transcends death, that some places are too important to ever really die. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Remember, I said I wake up at 3:47 a.m. every night? It's true, every single night since I visited Wonderland. But it's not the carousel music that wakes me. It's the doorbell. Every night at exactly 3:47 a.m. my doorbell rings. I've checked the camera. Nobody's ever there. But on my doorstep, without fail, is a single piece of pink cotton candy in a clear plastic bag. Fresh, still warm, with a small tag that says, Wendell's Wonder Treats, since 1952. I've never eaten one. I'm afraid of what might happen if I do. Afraid I might wake up back in the park, back on that midway, unable to leave. Or worse, afraid I might want to stay. They're piling up in my freezer now. 17 bags of impossible cotton candy. Evidence that Wonderland Park isn't done with me. That maybe Arthur was wrong. Maybe some people don't get just one night. Maybe some people are marked, chosen, destined to be bridges between the abandoned and the living. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just Harold Winthrop's way of saying thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for telling people that his park, his wonderful, terrible, impossible park, still matters. I don't have answers. I just have tickets and cotton candy and footage that doesn't show what really happened. I have the memory of my sister's last hug, and Arthur's tired smile, and Harold's endless grief. I have a YouTube channel with 3 million subscribers now, all hoping I'll find another impossible place. And I have a decision to make tonight, right now, because it's 3:46 a.m., and in 1 minute the doorbell will ring. And tonight, there's something different. Tonight, I can hear carousel music, faint, distant. But getting closer, tonight I think the park is coming to me. I should be terrified, should call someone, should run. But instead, I'm sitting here talking to you, whoever you are, listening in your bed, thinking this is just a story. And maybe it is, maybe I made it all up for views and subscribers and that little bit of YouTube fame. Or maybe when your doorbell rings at an impossible hour, when you find a ticket you didn't buy, when you smell popcorn and cotton candy in the middle of the night, maybe you'll remember this story. Remember that some invitations can't be refused. Some places can't be forgotten. Some goodbyes take longer than a lifetime to say. The doorbell just rang. I'm going to answer it. If you never hear from me again, check Millbrook, Iowa. Check the abandoned park on County Road 49. Look for the ticket booth near the Tornado roller coaster. And if you find an old man in a striped vest, reading a newspaper from 1987, tell him Jake says hello. Tell him I understood. Tell him I'm ready for one more ride. The music is getting louder now. Not creepy, not scary, beautiful. The sound of a place where people go to be happy, even if just for a moment. Even if that moment lasts forever. I can see lights through my window. Colored lights. Spinning. Dancing. Impossible. The park doesn't just remember, you see. Sometimes it comes to collect. My hand is on the doorknob. On the other side, I can hear laughter. Children playing. The ding of carnival games. And underneath it all, so faint I might be imagining it, my sister's voice calling my name. I'm going to open the door now. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing, even if you don't. Thank you for keeping the story alive. And remember, if you ever find a ticket that says admit one, valid forever, remember that forever is a very long time. Remember that some rides don't end. Remember that abandoned places aren't always empty. Remember me. The door is opening. The light is so bright, and I can see. Recording ends. 3 days later. Local news report. Cedar Rapids resident Jake Morrison, age 28, was reported missing after failing to show up for work on Monday. His apartment was found empty, with no signs of struggle. The only unusual detail, according to police, was a large quantity of cotton candy found in his freezer and 2 vintage amusement park tickets on his kitchen table. Security footage shows Morrison's door opening at 3:47 a.m. on Sunday, but no one is visible on camera. Morrison was known for his YouTube channel exploring abandoned places. Anyone with information is asked to contact local authorities. In other news, multiple residents of Millbrook, Iowa, reported seeing strange lights near the site of the old Wonderland Park last night. The property, abandoned since 1987, has been the subject of numerous urban legends. Local police investigated but found nothing unusual, though one officer noted the distinct smell of popcorn in the air. If you have any information about Jake Morrison's whereabouts, please contact... Static. Wait, can you hear that? That music? It sounds like a carousel. Why do I have a ticket in my hand? Where did this come from? Admit one, valid forever. Additional recording found, Jake's phone, recovered from Wonderland Park. Site. Recording begins. Timestamp 3:52 a.m., October 28th. If someone finds this, I don't know how much time I have to explain. The door opened and I walked through, and now I'm back at Wonderland, but it's different this time. Different from my first visit. The park isn't showing me memories anymore. It's showing me the truth. I'm in Harold Winthrop's office. It's above the funhouse, overlooking the entire park. There are documents everywhere, photos, maps, things that were never found after the park closed. And they tell a different story, a worse story. Arthur lied to me, or maybe he didn't know. Maybe none of them knew. Harold Winthrop didn't close the park because his daughter died. Sarah is here. I can see her through the window right now, riding the carousel. She's been riding it for 37 years. Around and around and around. She can't stop. None of them can stop. The documents. God, the documents. Harold wasn't trying to cure her cancer. There was no cancer. He was trying to preserve her, to keep her 17 forever. He found something. Or something found him. There are letters here from someone called the Carnival Master. They're dated from 1886, 1773, 1654, all signed by the same hand, all offering the same bargain. Your park for her life, your visitors for her joy, your eternity for her eternity. Harold took the deal. October 15th, 1987, he signed the contract. Not in ink, in something else. Something that still glows on the paper when I hold it to the candlelight. The last families to leave that night. The Morrison family from Des Moines, the Hendersons from Omaha, the Clearys from Chicago. They never made it home. Their cars were found abandoned on different highways, all the occupants missing. 17 families total, one for each year of Sarah's life. They're all here. I can see them from the window, still riding the rides, still playing the games, still eating cotton candy and laughing and having the best day of their lives. Over and over and over, they don't know they're trapped. They think they just arrived. Every loop, they think they just arrived. Arthur and the other employees, they weren't heroes who stayed with Harold. They were the first ones caught, the first ones who couldn't leave after closing time. They know they're trapped. That's the difference. They know and they've accepted it, and now they help trap others. Every person who finds a ticket, every person who comes here for closure, some of them don't leave. The park chooses, takes what it needs. One soul for every year the park has been closed. We're at 37 now, after tonight. 38. I can feel it happening to me. My feet are getting heavier. My memories of the outside world are fading like old photographs left in the sun. In a few minutes, I won't remember why I'm recording this. Won't remember I ever had a life outside Wonderland. I'll just be another employee helping Arthur run the rides, giving tickets to sad people who need closure. But before I forget, before I become part of this place, I need you to know something. The tickets aren't invitations, they're lures. The park is hungry. It needs people to keep the rides running, to keep Sarah happy, to keep the illusion alive. And it's getting hungrier. The emails, Retro Roadside 73, that's the park itself. It learned how to use the internet, learned how to find people like me, urban explorers, lost souls, people who wouldn't be missed immediately, people who were already looking for something in abandoned places. There are more parks. The Carnival Master's letters mention them. 33 in total, scattered across America, all closed between 1955 and 99. All with similar stories. Sudden closures, missing owners, local legends about lights in the darkness, and all of them connected, part of something called the Eternal Midway. I found a map, God help me, I found a map. Joyland in Kansas, Neptune's Kingdom in Florida, Silver Beach in Michigan, Freedom Land in New York. They're all part of it, all feeding the same thing. The Carnival Master isn't a person. It's the collective consciousness of every abandoned amusement park in America, every place where joy turned to rust, every carousel that stopped turning, every roller coaster that made its last run, and it's growing stronger. Every year, more parks close, more join the network, more tickets appear under windshield wipers, more people disappear into the space between memory and reality. My sister, Emma, wasn't really there. The park can't bring back the dead. It can only show us what we want to see, make us feel what we need to feel to stay. It feeds on our grief, our nostalgia, our desperate need to believe that happy places never really die. But they do die. And when they die wrong, when they die with unfinished business, with broken hearts, with unfulfilled promises, they become something else, something hungry, something that needs us to remember them so badly that they'll take us prisoner just to have an audience. I can hear footsteps on the stairs. Arthur, probably, coming to collect me, to give me my uniform, to teach me my role in the eternal show. But I'm not going without a fight. I'm going to try something. The contract Harold signed, it's right here. If I can destroy it, maybe I can free everyone. Sarah, the families, the employees, maybe even myself. The footsteps are getting closer. I'm going to put the phone down and grab the contract. If the recording cuts off, you'll know I failed. But if it doesn't, if I manage to... Wait, the contract. It's not Harold's signature at the bottom. It's mine. My name, my handwriting, dated 3 weeks from now. How is that possible? How can I have signed something that hasn't happened yet? Unless time really does move differently here. Unless I've been here before. Unless I've always been here, and everything else My life, my channel, my sister's death was just the dream the park let me have. The doors opening. It's not Arthur, it's me, an older me, wearing a carnival Barker's uniform, smiling that same sad smile Arthur had. "Hello, Jake," he says. I say. We say. "Ready for your first day of forever?" I'm screaming, but no sound comes out. The phone is getting heavy. So heavy. Everything is heavy. Even the air. Even time itself. The other me is reaching for the phone. "Can't have that getting out," he says. "Might discourage visitors, and we need visitors. The park needs visitors. Sarah needs visitors." "This isn't real," I manage to whisper. "Real is relative here," he replies. "What's real? The happiness families felt here? The memories they made? The joy that soaked into every board and bolt? Or the decay outside, the rust and ruin? Which is the dream, Jake? The park in its glory, eternal and bright? Or the world where everything dies?" He's taking the phone now. My fingers won't grip it, won't hold on. Everything is fading, but I can still speak, still warn you. Don't come looking for me. Don't come to Wonderland. Don't follow the coordinates, don't take the ticket. The parks are spreading, connecting, growing. Soon they won't need tickets, won't need invitations. They'll just appear. In your dreams first, then in the corner of your eye, then in your backyard, your street, your... Recording ends abruptly. Final note. Found in Jake Morrison's apartment. Written on a Wonderland Park napkin. To whoever finds this, the recording on my phone isn't real. I made it up, all of it. For the video, for the views. Had to make it seem authentic, you know? The whole thing is just an ARG, an elaborate hoax. The park is just an abandoned place. Nothing supernatural, nothing dangerous. Please don't come looking for me, I'm fine. I just needed to disappear for a while. Creative burnout, you understand? But if you absolutely must visit Wonderland Park, if you can't resist the pull, bring iron filings. Spread them at the entrance. The old stories say iron disrupts things like this. Breaks connections, forces truth through illusion. And whatever you do, whatever you see, whatever the park offers you, don't ride the carousel. The carousel is the heart. The carousel is where it all started and where it all ends. Harold's daughter loved the carousel most of all. She's still on it, still 17, still dying, still living, forever and ever and ever. The ticket in your hand is getting warm, isn't it? You're thinking about using it, aren't you? Don't or do. The park doesn't care. The park is patient. The park has all the time in the world. After all, every abandoned place was once somewhere people went to be happy. And happiness that strong. Happiness that pure. It never really dies. It just waits. Waits for someone to remember. Waits for someone to return. Waits for someone to stay. Check your pocket. I bet you have a ticket now, too. See you soon. Jake Morrison, or what's left of him. P.S. If you see my sister, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to leave. Tell her the park wouldn't let me. Tell her I'll be running the tornado now, just like Arthur. Forever. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, check your pockets. Check your car. Check under your pillow. Because the park remembers everyone who listens to its story. And sometimes it sends invitations. Sometimes it sends more than invitations. Sometimes it sends itself. Sweet dreams. And remember, if you hear carousel music tonight, don't follow it, unless you're ready for forever. End. Story number 3. The first time I noticed my reflection wasn't quite right. It was 3 a.m, and I was getting water from the kitchen. The house in Millbrook, Connecticut was supposed to be my fresh start, but standing there in the dark, watching my reflection take half a second too long to copy my movements, I knew something was terribly wrong. if you're listening to this right now, lying in your bed, maybe with the lights off, I need you to do something for me. Look at your hands. Really look at them. Do they feel like yours, or do they feel like they've always belonged to someone else, someone you were meant to become? Before you answer that, let me tell you what happened to me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why I'm asking. Our story begins now. My name is David Chen, or at least, that's what I've been calling myself for the past 32 years. 3 months ago, my great-aunt Martha passed away and left me her Victorian house in Millbrook. I'd never met her, which made the inheritance strange, but not as strange as what I found inside. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Beverly, handed me the keys with an odd expression. "Your aunt was very specific," she said, studying my face. "She said the house would recognize you." I laughed it off. Old people say weird things sometimes, right? But Beverly didn't laugh. She just kept staring at me, like she was trying to see something beneath my skin. The house sat on Elmwood Drive, a quiet street where the trees grew so thick they formed a canopy overhead, even in broad daylight. It felt like twilight. The Victorian was painted sage green with cream trim, perfectly maintained despite being over 100 years old. The porch wrapped around the entire front, and wind chimes hung from every beam, dozens of them, all different sizes and materials. They made this constant. Soft music that should have been peaceful, but wasn't. Inside, the house smelled like vanilla and old paper. Every room was furnished, like someone had just stepped out and would be back any minute. Family photos covered the walls. Generations of faces I didn't recognize, except there was one photo in the hallway. A young man from what looked like the 1950s, standing in front of this very house. He had my exact face, not similar, not a family resemblance, exact, down to the small scar above my left eyebrow from when I fell off my bike at age 7. I took the photo down, turned it over. Written on the back in fading ink, "David Chen, 1954, welcome home." My hands started shaking. That was my name, my exact name. But I was born in '82, the first week. I tried to rationalize everything. Coincidence. A relative with the same name. Maybe my parents had seen this photo once and named me after him. The mind can make connections where none exist, right? But then I found the journal. It was in the attic, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden inside an old trunk. The first entry was dated 1954. The handwriting was mine. I don't mean it looked like mine. I mean it was identical, down to the way I crossed my T's with a little flourish. The journal entries started normal, talking about work at the local pharmacy, dating a girl named Susan, weekend trips to New York City. But as they progressed, they became unsettling. "I can feel him," one entry read. The next one, "He's not born yet, but I can feel him waiting, watching through years that haven't happened. When my time comes, he'll take my place. Just like I took Henry's place, just like Henry took William's place. We are links in a chain, stretched across time, each of us becoming who we were meant to replace." I slammed the journal shut. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was insane, impossible. But that night, I had the first dream. I was standing in the house, but it looked different. Older furniture, different wallpaper. A radio played in the background. President Eisenhower's voice talking about the highway system. I looked down at my hands. They were my hands. But I was wearing clothes from the 50s. Someone called my name. "David, dinner's ready." I turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Susan. Somehow I knew her name was Susan, even though I'd never seen her before. She smiled at me, and I felt this overwhelming sense of recognition. like I'd loved her for years. "You're looking pale again," she said, touching my cheek. "Are the headaches back?" I wanted to say I didn't know what she was talking about, but my mouth opened and words came out on their own. "Just tired, honey. Long day at the pharmacy." The dream felt so real, I could smell her perfume. White shoulders. I could feel the wool of my sweater, slightly itchy against my skin. When I woke up, my sheets were soaked with sweat, and I could still smell that perfume. But here's what I didn't tell you yet. When I woke up from that first dream, there was dirt under my fingernails. Garden soil. Fresh. And on my nightstand, a receipt from Morrison's Pharmacy, dated June 15th, 1954. The ink was still wet. I sat there for an hour, just staring at it, watching the impossible ink dry on impossible paper. The receipt was for aspirin and a malted milk. Total, 35 cents. Paid with a silver dollar. Change, 65 cents. The handwriting at the bottom. "Thanks, Mr. Chen. See you tomorrow. Bobby Morrison." Bobby Morrison. I Googled him. He'd owned the pharmacy until 1968 when he died of a heart attack. His obituary mentioned his favorite customer, David Chen, who disappeared mysteriously in 1957. They found his car by the Housatonic River, but never found his body. The same year Susan Miller also disappeared. The changes started small. I'd catch myself humming songs I didn't know. Old songs from the 50s. "In the Still of the Night" by the Five Satins. "Earth Angel" by the Penguins. I'd never heard these songs before, but I knew every word. My handwriting started changing. No, that's not right. It was becoming more itself, like it had always been trying to write this way. But I'd been forcing it to be different. I found myself craving foods I'd never liked. Liver and onions, buttermilk, black coffee with no sugar. When I'd been a 2-cream, 2-sugar guy my whole life, the first time I made liver and onions. My hands moved on their own, knowing exactly how much pepper to add, when to flip it, like muscle memory for something I'd never done. The dreams came every night now, different scenes from the same life. Working at Morrison's Pharmacy on Main Street, dancing with Susan at the Millbrook Summer Social, fixing the Ford Fairlane in the garage. A whole life. Complete and detailed. That felt more real than my actual memories. But the worst part was that my real memories were starting to fade. I couldn't remember my mother's maiden name. I knew I should know it. But when I reached for the memory, it was like grabbing smoke. My childhood home in Portland, was it blue or gray? Did we have a dog? I thought we did, but I couldn't picture it. Meanwhile, the other memories, David's memories. The first David, they were crystal clear. I could tell you the name of every customer who came into Morrison's Pharmacy. I could describe Susan's laugh, the way it started as a giggle and bloomed into something that made everyone around her smile. I could feel the arthritis in his right knee from a baseball injury in high school. One night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. I know the time because the old grandfather clock in the hallway chimed wrong. 17 times instead of 3. And I wasn't in my bed. I was standing in the basement, fully dressed in clothes that weren't mine. Old clothes that smelled like mothballs and age. In my hand, a key I'd never seen before. The key fit into a lock behind the water heater. A hidden door I hadn't known existed. Inside was a small room. Newspapers covered the walls, all from 1957. All about the disappearances. David Chen, Susan Miller, 3 others. All vanished within the same week. No bodies ever found. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the notebook on the small desk. My handwriting. Fresh ink. Still writing itself as I watched. words appearing on the page without any hand to guide them. The convergence approaches. Time is thinning. The house breathes with all our lungs. We dream with all our minds. Soon, the doors will align. Soon, we will be one. Soon, soon, soon. I grabbed the notebook, tried to tear it. The pages wouldn't rip, tried to burn it with a lighter. The flame turned cold and blue, then went out. The notebook just kept writing. Page after page, filling itself with thoughts that were mine but not mine. Words in languages I didn't know but could somehow read. Sanskrit, Latin, something older that hurt to look at. 3 weeks into living in the house. I looked in the bathroom mirror and nearly screamed. My face was different, not dramatically, but my jaw was slightly stronger, my eyes a shade darker. The changes were so subtle that no one who didn't know me well would notice. But I knew. I was becoming him. I tried to leave, packed my bags, got in my car. But every road out of Millbrook seemed to curve back toward Elmwood Drive. I'd take the highway north and somehow end up approaching the house from the south. GPS didn't help. It just spun and spun, like the house was a black hole, bending space around it. That's when I found the second journal, hidden under a loose floorboard in the bedroom. This one was older, from 1923, written by Henry Whitman, except halfway through. The name changed to David Chen. The handwriting stayed the same. The transformation is almost complete, Henry, or David, had written. I understand now. We are not replacing each other. We are the same soul, splintered across time. Each incarnation adds to the whole, like layers of paint on a canvas. We don't disappear. We accumulate. I threw the journal across the room. It hit the wall and fell open to a page with a photograph tucked inside. A daguerreotype from the 1800s. The man in the photo had my face. By the second month, I'd stopped fighting it. What was the point? Every morning, I woke up with more of his memories, more of his mannerisms. I'd started shopping at stores I'd never been to, but knew exactly where everything was. The owner of the hardware store greeted me like an old friend. "David, haven't seen you in ages. You look just like your grandfather." I wanted to scream that I wasn't anyone's grandfather, that this was all wrong. But instead, I heard myself saying, "Good to see you, Tom. How's Margaret's hip?" Tom's face went white. Margaret's been dead for 40 years. "David, you feeling all right?" The slip-ups happened more often. I'd reference events from decades ago like they happened yesterday. I knew things I couldn't possibly know. The combination to a safe in the basement that had been sealed since 1962. Inside, more journals, going back further. 1892, 1871, 1834. All different names at first, then all becoming David Chen. But there was something else in that safe, something that made my blood run cold. Photographs, dozens of them, all of Susan Miller, but taken across different decades, different centuries even, always the same face, always the same sad smile, always waiting. In one photo from 1891, she stood next to a man named James Watson. He had my face. In another from 1823, she was with Theodore Blackwood. My face again. Every photo, every generation. The same two people finding each other, losing each other, finding each other again. I found a letter, brittle with age, but somehow still intact. "My dearest David," or whatever name you carry now, I write this knowing you will find it, as you always do. We are caught in the same web, you and I. The house calls to both of us. We dance the same dance across centuries, never quite touching, always just missing each other. But I wait. I always wait. In whatever form I take, whatever name I wear. I wait for you to remember, to become complete, so we can finally break free, or finally surrender. I no longer know which we're trying to do. All my love, forever and always. S. That night, I saw her. Not in a dream. In my kitchen, young and solid and real, wearing a 1950s house dress, making coffee in my modern coffee maker like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're early," she said without turning around. "You usually don't see me until the 3rd month." My voice came out as a whisper. "You're dead. You died in 1957. She laughed, that laugh I remembered from memories that weren't mine. "Oh, David. We don't die, we just pause. Between movements, like music. The spaces between the notes are just as important as the notes themselves." She turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw her as she really was, all of her. Every version, young and old and ancient and not yet born. All superimposed like a multiple exposure photograph. Beautiful and terrible and impossible. "The house is almost ready," she said. "Can you feel it? The walls are getting thinner. Not just between rooms, between years, between worlds. Soon, there won't be any walls at all." "What happens then?" I asked. She smiled, sad and knowing. "What always happens. What happened before, what will happen again. We become who we're meant to be, all of us, together." She reached out to touch my face, and her hand passed right through me, cold, like winter wind. "Not yet," she whispered, "but soon. The door is almost ready to open." Then she was gone, but the coffee was still there, hot and fresh, made just the way I liked it, or the way he liked it, or the way we liked it. I couldn't tell anymore. The oldest journal was from 1798, written by a man named Josiah Blackwood. The pages were so brittle they crumbled at the edges when I touched them, but I could read his account of building this house, of making a deal with something he didn't fully understand. "They promised me immortality," he wrote, "but not as I imagined. Not one continuous life, but many lives, folded into one. I would die and be reborn, always returning to this house, always becoming myself again. Each time, I would be more complete, until finally, I would be whole." The entries grew frantic toward the end. "I see them all, the future selves. They watch me through mirrors, through windows, through time itself. We are a snake eating its own tail. Infinite and trapped. I tried to burn the house, but the flames turned cold. I tried to demolish it, but the hammers shattered. This place is outside of time, and so am I. So are we. So are all of us who are me that night. I had a different dream. I was in a room full of mirrors, but each reflection was different. The 1950s David, Henry from the 1920s, Josiah from 1798, dozens of others, all with my face, all looking at me. "You're almost ready," they said in unison, their voices creating a horrible harmony. "Almost complete." "Ready for what?" I asked. They smiled, all of them, the exact same smile. "To become who you were always meant to be, to close the circle. You're the last one. David, the final piece." I woke up screaming, but when I looked in the mirror, all of them were there. Faint, like double exposures, all those faces, all those lives, layered on top of mine. The town had started to notice something was wrong. People would stare at me on the street. Some crossed themselves, others hurried away. Beverly, the realtor, left a note on my door. "The house has claimed another one. God help you." But the strangest encounter was with an old woman at the grocery store. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but she seemed to see right through me. "I knew Susan," she whispered. "My grandmother, she never got over losing you, waited her whole life for you to come back. She said you promised, said you'd find a way." I wanted to tell her she was confused, that I'd never known anyone named Susan, but the words that came out were, "I tried, I'm trying, tell her I'm almost there." The old woman patted my hand. She knew, she always knew. She's waiting on the other side. That night, I found the final journal, my journal, the one I'd been writing in without realizing it. My handwriting, but words I didn't remember putting down. The convergence is near. All of my selves are pressing close, like layers of glass about to fuse. I can feel every heartbeat I've ever had, every breath across centuries. We are not many. We are one, divided by time. Soon, time will collapse, and we will be whole. The house is the crucible. The house is the doorway. The house is us. I tried to burn the journal. The flames turned cold, just like Josiah had written. I tried to leave again, but this time, I didn't even make it to the car. My feet walked me back inside on their own. That's when the phone calls started. My phone would ring at 3:17 a.m. every night. The caller ID showed my own number. When I answered, I heard my voice, but older, or younger, or just different. "Stop fighting it," the voice would say. "You're only making it harder. We've all been through this. The resistance, the fear, the confusion. But it passes. Everything passes. Everything returns. Just let go." One night, I didn't hang up. I listened. And I could hear them all the Davids, all the voices, talking over each other, under each other, through each other, a chorus of myself spanning centuries. "The door appears on the final night," they said in unison, "when all the walls are thin enough, when all the times align, when the house finally exhales." "What's behind the door?" I asked. They laughed, all of them. The same laugh at different ages. "We are," they said. "We've always been behind the door, waiting to be whole, waiting to be home, waiting to be real." The line went dead, but I could still hear them, in the walls, in the floors, in the air itself. The house was full of voices now, full of memories, full of lives all pressing against the present, trying to break through. It's been 3 months now, 3 months since I inherited this house, 3 months since I started becoming someone I was meant to replace. Except, I understand now, I'm not replacing anyone. I'm remembering who I've always been. The mirrors show all of us clearly now. Sometimes I catch myself having conversations with them, with myself, with myselves. We debate philosophy, share memories, argue about whether the Yankees or the Red Sox had the better team in 1957. It should be madness, but it feels like completion. Last night, something changed. The wind chimes on the porch all rang at once, even though there was no wind. The house shifted, like it took a breath it had been holding for centuries. And in every mirror, every window, every reflection, we all turned to look at the same thing. A door that had never been there before, in the basement wall, ancient wood, older than the house, older than Millbrook, maybe older than America itself, with a handle made of bone. We all knew, all of us versions of me. This was why we were gathered. This was why the house had called us home, across centuries, across death and rebirth. Whatever was behind that door, we were meant to open it, together as one. I'm standing in front of it now, recording this on my phone, if you're listening to this. If you've made it this far, I need you to understand something. The house on Elmwood Drive isn't unique. There are others. Scattered across the country, across the world. Houses that exist outside of time. Houses that call their owners home. Again and again and again. Look around your room right now. Does anything seem familiar? But not from your life? From a life you haven't lived yet, or one you lived before? That painting on your wall. Did you buy it? Or has it always been there, that scar on your hand? Do you really remember how you got it? Or is that someone else's memory, bleeding through? The door is opening now, without me touching it. Inside, I can see myself, all of myselves, not reflections, real, solid. The David from 1954, young and hopeful, Henry from 1923, still wearing his suspenders, Josiah from 1798, in his tricorn hat, dozens of others, all waiting, and behind them, something else, something that doesn't have a face, because it's all faces, doesn't have a name, because it's all names. It's what we've been becoming, what I've been becoming, the complete self, undivided by time. It's reaching out to me now, and I understand. This isn't an ending. It's not even a beginning. It's a continuation of something that's always been happening, will always be happening, is happening right now. My hand is reaching back. When we touch, when all of us finally merge, I don't know what happens, but I can feel it. The weight of centuries, the pull of destinies intertwined. Every choice I've ever made, will make, am making, collapsing into a single moment. If you're still listening, if you've come this far with me, I have one last thing to tell you. Check your family photos, the old ones, the ones in albums you never look at. Check the faces. Check them carefully. Because I'm looking at the wall of photos here, and in every generation, in every decade, there's a face I recognize. It's not always the same name, not always the same family, but the eyes are always the same. They're your eyes. The door is fully open now. I can see everything, every moment I've lived, will live, am living. Susan is there, young and beautiful, waiting like she promised, the pharmacy, the Ford Fairlane, the baseball injury, all of it, all of me. But also, I can see forward, to the next David, the one who will inherit this house in 2087. He's listening to this recording, in his time, trying to understand, starting to remember the cycle continuing. Is that you? Are you him? Are you me? The hand is closing around mine now. All of our hands, all of my hands, joining, merging, becoming. I'm not disappearing. I'm not being replaced. I'm becoming complete. Becoming who I was always meant to be, who I always was, who I will always be. The house is humming now. Every wind chime singing, every mirror glowing. This is it. This is the moment. This is... Wait, there's something else. Something I didn't see before. Behind all of us. Behind the thing with all faces. There's another door, and another, and another. Infinite doors, infinite houses, infinite versions of this same story. Playing out everywhere, every when. We're all connected. Every person who's ever lived alone, ever inherited something strange, ever looked in a mirror and saw someone else looking back. We're all part of the same pattern, the same cosmic design. The snake eating its tail isn't just me. It's everyone. It's everything. And now I can hear them. All of them. All of you. Listening to this story. In your beds. In the dark. Feeling that tingle at the back of your neck. That sense that something's watching. Something's waiting. It is. We are. I am. The transformation is complete. I'm whole now. All of myselves. Merged into one. and I can feel the next one being born right now, somewhere in Portland. A baby named David Chen, who will grow up, live a life, and one day inherit a house in Millbrook, Connecticut. The cycle continues. It has to. That's what we are. What you are, what everything is. Patterns repeating, souls recycling, lives layered on lives until the picture is complete. But here's the thing I didn't understand until now. The picture is never complete. It just keeps getting more detailed, more complex, more beautiful and terrible with each iteration. So when you wake up tomorrow, and you look in the mirror, and for just a second, half a second, your reflection moves without you. Remember this story. Remember my name, all of my names, because one day, you'll inherit something, a house, a watch, a photograph, something that calls to you, something that feels like home in a way that makes no sense. And when that day comes, when you start having dreams of lives you haven't lived, when you start remembering things that haven't happened yet, you'll understand. You'll understand that you're not becoming someone else. You're becoming who you were always meant to be, who you've always been, who you will always be. Welcome home. The recording ends there. But I know you felt it, didn't you? That recognition, that pull. Like you've heard this story before, like you've lived it before. Check your family photos. Check them tonight. And if you see a face that looks too familiar, a face that shouldn't be there, don't be afraid. You're just remembering. We all are. And if you need to talk about it, if you need to share what you've found, leave a comment below. Tell me about the faces in your photos, the dreams you've been having, the house that's been calling you. Because I'm still here, in Millbrook, in this house that exists outside of time, waiting for the next David, waiting for you, waiting for all of us to remember who we really are. The wind chimes are singing again. Can you hear them? Of course you can. You've always been able to hear them. You're already home. Now, sleep. Or at least try to. It's quiet now, too quiet, but not empty. That feeling crawling up your spine, that weight pressing on your chest, that's not your imagination. You're not alone. There's something behind the curtain. You haven't looked, not because you forgot, but because you're afraid to know. You heard the whisper, software wet, wrong. Like breath dragged across broken glass. But you told yourself it was the wind, didn't you? That lie made you feel safe. Temporarily. Let me ask you, does the wind whisper your name? Does the wind tap lightly, again and again, from the same spot, behind the curtain, every night? Does the wind leave scratches on your window that weren't there this morning? Thin, sharp, like claws, like warnings. You don't remember opening the window. You never open the window. But it's unlocked now. You could check, you could stand up, you could walk over and pull the curtain back. But you won't, because you know. You know what's waiting, not because you've seen it, but because you felt it. In the quiet, in the dark. Every time you close your eyes, every time you wake up and your blanket is just slightly moved. Your door slightly cracked. You try to explain it. Your mind wants to explain it. But that whisper, that sound that only comes when you're alone, when everything is still, when the night is at its deepest, that's not a dream, that's a presence. It doesn't want your fear, it wants your attention. It feeds on the moment you doubt yourself. The second you wonder if you heard something, the instant your heart rate rises. That's when it leans closer. It's been patient, watching, learning you like prey. You ever notice it never shows up when the lights are on, when someone's in the room? It waits for the ritual, the brushing of your teeth, the turning off of lights, the last look at your phone, the deep breath just before sleep. That's when it wakes up. That's when it stirs behind the curtain. Sometimes it watches you all night. Sometimes it moves. A shift in the shadow. A faint creak on the floorboards. The sound of fabric sliding over skin. And when you don't check, when you ignore it, that's when it comes closer. Not fast, not loud, just closer. You might feel a cold spot on the bed. You might feel breath on your neck. You might hear a whisper in your ear that sounds almost like your voice. It copies, it mimics, it blends, not to confuse you, to prepare you, because soon it won't need the curtain, it won't need shadows, it will sit beside you, stand behind you, speak through you. You won't even know when it happens. You'll wake up, look in the mirror, and something will be off. Your eyes won't blink quite right, your smile will linger too long. Your reflection will move just a little after you do. And the people around you? They'll say you seem different. Not worse, just not you. But tonight you're still you. Still in control, for now. You could still check. You could still confront it. Pull the curtain back, face it, but deep down, you've already made your choice. You won't. Because you'd rather lie still, let your eyes drift shut, and hope sleep comes quickly. And it will. But what you wake up as might not be the same. Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you, that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you into the next room, into your dreams, into your reflection. If you liked this story, like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss the next one, so we don't miss you, and comment below. Tell us the moment you stopped feeling alone. We're watching, we're listening, and we read everything. Now, go ahead, gain the courage to check the dark corners before you sleep. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, sleep well, if you can.